Throughout history, we tend to think that empires are born on the battlefield and perish on the battlefield. But war is far from being the primary reason an empire collapses. Empires are not ended by wars, they are ended by budgets. And the empire that understood this best ruled the world for 6 centuries, not just with the sword, as you might imagine, but with money. For 600 years, a single empire waged war after war against kings, sultans, republics, crusaders, rebels, and rising European powers. And it won most of those wars. It conquered nations, it lost nations, it redrew borders, it survived crises, and it kept its army marching from the Balkans all the way to the Arabian desert. And while doing all of this, it achieved something almost no other empire in history ever managed. Despite all that conflict, despite all that success, it did not go bankrupt. The name of this empire was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire did not simply rush from one war to the next. It found a way to finance war for as long as it wished. The Ottoman Empire endured from roughly 1299 to 1922, longer than the Roman Empire, longer than the British Empire, longer than almost any state the modern world usually talks about. But its long life is not the most fascinating part. The real mystery is this: how did an empire that fought at nearly every opportunity never get crushed and destroyed under financial pressure? Western audiences often imagine that empires fall because they lose wars. But wars do not destroy nations. Budgets do. Leaders do. Logistics do. The Ottomans realized this very early. And instead of building a conventional tax and army system like the kingdoms of Europe, they built something far more efficient, a machine in which war could pay for its own expenses. The Ottomans took their first steps as a small frontier principality in northwest Anatolia, led by a warlord named Osman. A few thousand horsemen and a talent for being in the right place at the right time. When the Byzantine Empire began to crumble, and Mongol power withdrew from the Near East, Osman's followers were perfectly positioned to win new land. The early victories were not just military successes, they were financial gains. Because every conquest meant land, resources, crops, and taxes, and new populations from which revenue could be drawn. And this is the first key to understanding the Ottoman financial system. From the very first day, war was not a financial burden. It was a source of income. When the Ottomans conquered Bursa in 1326 and turned toward Europe in the 1350s, they were no longer a frontier principality. They had become a rising power that controlled the trade routes between Europe and Asia. And in the medieval world, that was like holding a monopoly over the arteries of the planet. Every merchant traveling from Venice to Persia, from Cairo to Budapest, from Baghdad to Istanbul, passed through the Ottoman gate. This mattered because war required 3 things: food, metal, and men. The Ottoman Empire did not have more of these than its neighbors, but it had something far more important: cash flow. Their empire was built on the richest crossroads of the medieval world: silk, spices, carpets, horses, weapons, timber, sugar, copper. Everything passed through their lands, and everything that moved the Ottomans taxed. But a strong source of revenue alone does not fully explain how the empire paid for centuries of campaigns stretching from the walls of Vienna to the mountains of Yemen. Because nearly every empire in history had a source of revenue, and most of them were still crushed under military costs and faded into history. What made the Ottomans different was structural. They built a financial system that turned the army into a self-financing institution. And here, the story shifts from geography to design, to one of the most important and most misunderstood systems in Ottoman history: the Timar system. Imagine a government trying to avoid the biggest cost of all: the payroll. Modern states spend fortunes on professional soldiers, salaries, equipment, horses, pensions. Armies drain treasuries dry. The Ottomans solved this problem by not paying soldiers in cash. Instead, they paid them in rights. Rights they granted. A timar was essentially a tax district. A soldier, usually a cavalryman called a sipahi, was given the right to collect taxes from a specific village or region. In return, he was obligated to cover his own needs, feed his horse, and appear for campaigns with proper armor and weapons. He earned no salary. He financed himself. This was one of the most ingenious pieces of financial engineering in the history of the world. Thanks to this, state expenses dropped. The soldier became invested in local stability because stable villages meant stable taxes. The peasants lived under a predictable local authority, and the empire gained an army that could mobilize quickly without rapidly draining the treasury. Imagine if today's government paid a soldier not with cash, but with the right to collect taxes from an entire county. If that sounds dangerous, you're right. But in the 1300s and the 1400s, it worked magnificently. It transformed the Ottoman army into a machine powered by taxation. And it did something even more important. It meant these wars could be waged even more cheaply. At the time, Europe relied on costly knights and mercenaries who demanded cash up front. If a king ran out of money, his army's loyalty to him ran out as well. The Ottoman Empire never had that problem. The cost of its soldiers kept flowing in, even in times of peace. War did not strain the budget. It kept the system running. But the timar system was not the only mechanism that financed 6 centuries of Ottoman warfare. There were other systems. Think of the most elite units of today. This system was built from the most select and elite soldiers of the Ottoman Empire, the Janissaries, the elite infantry that foreigners feared, that Christians resented, and that sultans trusted more than their own families. They were professional soldiers, disciplined, trained from youth, and loyal only to the state. But what made them so unique financially compared to other units was how the Ottomans acquired them and how they funded them. The Janissaries came from the devshirme. We could also call it the child levy. In Christian villages across the Balkans, boys were selected, taken from their homes, converted to Islam, and educated in the military schools of the empire. They were trained, shaped, and turned into soldiers who owed everything to the state, not to tribes, not to landlords, not to any region. Whether or not this system was ethical is not the part that concerns us. Yes, it was harsh and coercive, and there is no benefit in trying to romanticize it. But financially, it achieved something no other empire ever could. The Ottomans gained elite soldiers without paying the extremely high upfront cost of raising, training, and equipping men from birth. The empire invested heavily in Janissary education, but the initial economic burden of raising children to adulthood was effectively outsourced to the conquered populations. This meant the Ottoman Empire possessed fully trained soldiers without the lifetime expenses that would bankrupt a treasury. If the timar system turned the cavalry into a self-financing force, the Janissaries turned the infantry into a highly efficient, low-cost, professional elite corps. But the Ottoman Empire still did not stop there. They perfected something even more powerful: making war finance war. Whenever the empire conquered new territory, it did not simply gain land. It gained new taxpayers, new timars, new trade routes, new ports, and new streams of revenue. Every conquered territory strengthened the financial foundation of the next campaign even further. A European kingdom could win a war and return home poorer. The Ottoman Empire usually returned home richer. This is the heart of their long-term survival strategy. Not luck, cash flow. The empire used this strategy so well that, by the 1500s, it had become one of the wealthiest states in the world. War was expensive, but trade was more profitable, and the empire built financial systems to take that profit directly. One of them was the state monopoly. Certain goods, salt, tobacco, coffee, sometimes soap, were controlled directly by the state. These goods were indispensable for daily life, which meant money flowed into the treasury in a predictable way. And here the story begins to feel strangely modern. Because state monopolies are the ancestors of today's strategic national industries. Think of oil in Saudi Arabia. Think of gas pipelines in Russia. Think of the Suez Canal in Egypt. Every empire has a revenue anchor, and for the Ottomans, these monopolies were the closest thing they had to a permanent income machine. But the true genius of the Ottoman financial system, and its ultimate weakness, was how long it delayed the need to borrow. For centuries, the empire lived within its means. War was financed by land grants, trade tolls, tribute, plunder, and monopolies. There was no spiral of national debt. There was no giant bond market draining the treasury. There were no foreign lenders deciding the fate of the empire. This did not last forever. By the late 1600s and into the 1700s, the world changed. The powers of Europe industrialized. Their armies adopted new technologies, and their trade networks shifted away from the overland Ottoman routes and out across the oceans. Suddenly, the empire could no longer rely on caravans and tolls to finance its army. And worse still, the Timar system began to rot. Local tax holders abused their power. Central oversight weakened. The soldiers became less reliable. Then came the janissaries. Over the centuries, they gained political influence, wealth, and privilege. Until they became a state within a state, their financial independence and political power made them impossible to control. They resisted reform. They drained the treasury. And in the end, they became one of the greatest obstacles to modernization. When the empire finally began adopting European-style armies, it needed something it had avoided for centuries: cash salaries. And to finance that, it turned to something even more dangerous: foreign loans. In the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire began borrowing heavily from European banks at high interest rates. The very same European powers it had once defeated were now in control of its finances. The debt spiraled. The payments fell behind. In 1881, the empire was forced to surrender control of its finances to an international commission run by France and Britain. A humiliating end to centuries of financial independence. A familiar pattern, isn't it? A great power rises through financial discipline, holds itself together with innovative systems, ignores the early warning signs, and collapses the moment the economics stop working. If the Ottoman system sounds ancient to you, look around. The same mechanism still exists. It is simply wearing modern clothes. The old Timar system operates today as government contracts and privatized military logistics. Modern states outsource huge portions of their military operations to private companies, reducing the direct payroll burden, just as the Ottomans once did. Trade tolls have become the modern struggle for control over shipping lanes and energy routes, from the Strait of Hormuz to the South China Sea. Whoever controls a choke point controls the revenue that flows through it. State monopolies live on through national oil companies and sovereign wealth funds. Saudi Aramco plays the very same role the Ottoman salt monopoly once did, only now on a scale of trillions instead of millions. Conquest paying for conquest still exists too, in the form of resource-driven wars. Nations chase land and influence, not for glory, but for energy reserves, minerals, pipelines, and strategic geography. And late borrowing, the downfall of the Ottoman Empire, echoes today in our modern national debt crises. Many states finance their deficits with loans until the system cracks. Argentina, Greece, even the modern American debt debate. The financial logic of empire does not change. Only the uniforms do. So what is the lesson? Empires do not die on the battlefield. They die on the balance sheet. The Ottomans survived for 6 centuries because their financial system was disciplined, efficient, and masterfully designed to turn war into revenue. They collapsed when that system broke down, when expansion stopped paying for itself, when the trade routes bypassed their lands, when soldiers became expensive, and when the empire borrowed so much that foreign creditors came to own its very future. and beneath their story lies a deeper warning. Financial systems can sustain power for centuries until the day they cannot. If you are curious about the dark and unlit corners of history that powerful forces have long tried to keep hidden, do not forget to subscribe.